The architectural story of New York begins long before the soaring skyscrapers and iconic skyline that the city is known for today. In the early 1600s, when European settlers began arriving in the region, the landscape that would become New York City was still largely natural, with forests, hills, and rivers. The Dutch were among the first to settle here, founding the colony of New Amsterdam in 1624 on the southern tip of Manhattan Island. The architecture of this early period reflected practical needs, cultural traditions, and the limited resources available in the New World. Dutch colonial architecture was characterized by simple, sturdy structures made of brick or stone, with steep gabled roofs, small windows, and thick walls. Buildings were primarily functional, meant to withstand the elements and provide basic shelter. The Dutch also introduced the use of the stupa-raised platform or staircase at the front entrance, which became a common feature in later New York row houses. As English control replaced Dutch rule in 1664, renaming the city to New York, architectural styles began to shift accordingly. The English brought with them Georgian architectural traditions, which emphasized symmetry, proportion, and classical details. This was a time when buildings began to incorporate more decorative elements like pilasters, pediments, and ornate moldings, even as they remained relatively modest in scale. Churches, such as Trinity Church, originally built in 1698, and public buildings like City Hall began to reflect this Georgian influence, demonstrating the city's growing civic pride and political importance in the American colonies. By the mid-18th century, New York had grown into a bustling port and commercial hub, and its architecture evolved to reflect both prosperity and practicality. Brick row houses became more common, particularly in lower Manhattan, where space was limited. These homes were typically 2 or 3 stories tall, with simple, symmetrical facades and flat or gently sloping roofs. Fire was a constant threat in these early urban centers, so buildings were constructed with more fire-resistant materials, and city ordinances began to shape the layout and spacing of structures to prevent the rapid spread of flames. The American Revolution in the late 18th century disrupted life and development in the city. But in the post-war years, New York began to rapidly transform into a symbol of the new nation's hopes and ambitions. The federal style emerged during this time, a refined evolution of Georgian architecture that embraced clean lines, restrained ornamentation, and a sense of elegance. Federal-style buildings often featured fanlight windows above doors, decorative iron railings, and elliptical staircases. The Grange, the home of Alexander Hamilton in Harlem, is a well-preserved example of this style and serves as a reminder of how architectural trends intersected with the lives of influential historical figures. New York's early architecture was also influenced by its role as a melting pot of cultures. German, Huguenot, Jewish, and African communities all contributed in subtle ways to the city's built environment, whether through construction techniques, neighborhood layouts, or communal spaces like churches, schools, and marketplaces. This multicultural foundation would later become a defining characteristic of New York's architectural evolution, though in these early days, the city was still more colonial outpost than global metropolis. Infrastructure also began to improve during this era with the development of roads, bridges, and harbors that would shape future growth. Architects and builders began to look beyond immediate practical concerns, incorporating ideas of civic beauty and urban planning into their work. City Hall, completed in 1812, is one of the oldest city halls in continuous use in the United States and reflects both Federal and French Renaissance influences. It was designed not just as a functional building, but as a symbol of the city's aspirations and emerging identity. In these early centuries, architecture in New York was deeply tied to the rhythms of colonization, commerce, and civic life. Buildings were more than just shelter. They were expressions of identity, status, and vision. Although few structures from the 1600s and 1700s remain today, the legacy of this period can still be seen in the layout of certain streets, the preservation of landmark buildings, and the enduring influence of Dutch and English architectural styles in older neighborhoods. This formative era laid the groundwork for the architectural dynamism that would later define New York, proving that even the world's most futuristic cities are rooted in a complex, layered past. The 19th century was a period of explosive growth and transformation for New York City, both in population and in architectural identity. As waves of immigrants arrived and industrialization surged, the city expanded rapidly northward from its colonial roots in Lower Manhattan. The grid plan introduced by the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 began to shape the city's streets, creating a new urban framework that encouraged development and organization. During this time, architecture in New York started to evolve beyond the functional, modest styles of the colonial and early federal periods, embracing grandeur, symbolism, and a more formal approach to aesthetics. This evolution was deeply influenced by the Beaux-Arts movement, which would leave a lasting mark on the city's cultural and architectural landscape. The early decades of the 19th century saw the rise of Greek Revival architecture, a style that reflected the young nation's admiration for classical ideals of democracy and order. Prominent public buildings and banks were designed to resemble ancient temples with tall columns, porticos, and triangular pediments. As the financial sector grew in Lower Manhattan, Wall Street began to line up with imposing stone facades and structures designed to convey power and permanence. The Merchants Exchange Building and the original U.S. Custom House were examples of this gravitas in design, symbolizing New York's growing importance as a commercial and financial center. By the mid-century, styles began to diversify. The Italianate and Gothic Revival styles became popular, particularly for row houses, churches, and civic buildings. Brownstone row houses, with their iconic stoops and detailed cornices, started to dominate residential neighborhoods such as Brooklyn Heights and the Upper West Side. These homes were often designed in the Italianate or Neo-Greek style, featuring tall, narrow windows and carved stonework. At the same time, Gothic Revival churches such as Grace Church and St. Patrick's Cathedral brought a sense of European spirituality and drama to the city, with pointed arches, flying buttresses, and intricate stained glass. The second half of the 19th century marked the beginning of monumental architecture in New York, particularly through the influence of the Beaux-Arts style. Inspired by the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, this architectural movement emphasized symmetry, classical detail, and monumental scale. It was a reflection of New York's growing confidence and its desire to assert itself as a world-class city. Architects such as Richard Morris Hunt, Charles Follen McKim, and Stanford White trained in Europe and brought back a taste for grand ceremonial architecture. The result was a wave of opulent structures designed not only to serve practical purposes, but also to inspire civic pride. One of the most notable projects influenced by the Beaux-Arts movement was the design of public institutions and cultural landmarks. The New York Public Library, completed in 1911 but conceptualized in the late 19th century, is a striking example. Its marble facade, vast interior spaces, and classical columns all reflect the grandeur and order of Beaux-Arts principles. Similarly, Grand Central Terminal, although completed in the early 20th century, was rooted in 19th century design philosophies with its massive scale, ornate details, and theatrical spaces meant to elevate the experience of travel to something noble and awe-inspiring. Wealthy industrialists and financiers also contributed to the architectural transformation of the city during this period. The Gilded Age, marked by vast economic inequality and extravagant displays of wealth, saw the rise of private mansions along Fifth Avenue. Many of these homes, such as the Vanderbilt houses designed by Hunt, were modeled after European palaces, incorporating Renaissance, Baroque, and Rococo elements. Inside, they featured lavish ballrooms, imported marble, gilded ceilings, and libraries filled with rare books. These buildings were not only homes, but statements of status and ambition, reinforcing New York's identity as a city of opportunity and achievement. Another major influence during the 19th century was the City Beautiful movement, which emerged toward the century's end and overlapped with Beaux-Arts ideals. It advocated for the beautification of urban environments through cohesive architectural planning and the integration of green spaces, wide boulevards, and harmonious public buildings. Central Park, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux in the 1850s, was an early and transformative project that aligned with these values. The park introduced the concept of an urban oasis, blending natural beauty with thoughtful design and becoming a vital part of New York's architectural and social fabric. By the close of the 19th century, New York City had transformed from a colonial trading port into a sprawling metropolis filled with cultural institutions, monumental architecture, and increasingly sophisticated design. The Beaux-Arts movement and its related styles provided the visual language for this transformation, setting the stage for the architectural innovations and vertical ambitions that would define the 20th century. This was a century of foundations, where the ambition of a growing city was etched in stone, brick, and marble, reflecting both the dreams of its people and the influences of a global architectural dialogue. The dawn of the 20th century marked a dramatic turning point in the architectural history of New York City. With limited land and a rapidly growing population, the city's aspirations turned skyward. This era gave birth to the most iconic and defining element of New York's skyline, the skyscraper. No longer confined by traditional building methods or horizontal expansion, architects and engineers embraced new technologies like steel frame construction and elevators, which made it possible to build upward without limit. What began as a practical response to urban density evolved into an architectural movement that redefined the global perception of modern cities. The earliest skyscrapers, such as the Flatiron Building completed in 1902, captured public imagination with their striking verticality and unique forms. Though modest in height by today's standards, the Flatiron's triangular shape and commanding presence at the intersection of Fifth Avenue and Broadway made it a marvel of its time. It was one of the first buildings in New York to fully exploit steel frame construction, allowing for taller, thinner structures that could rise without the thick, load-bearing walls of older masonry buildings. This technical innovation not only changed the skyline, but also freed architects to experiment with form and ornamentation in entirely new ways. As the skyscraper race continued, buildings began to reach extraordinary heights. The Woolworth Building, completed in 1913 and known as the Cathedral of Commerce, soared to 792 feet, briefly becoming the tallest building in the world. Designed by Cass Gilbert, its neo-Gothic style combined modern engineering with old world ornamentation, signaling a bridge between the traditional and the futuristic. The Woolworth Building proved that vertical architecture could be both functional and beautiful, serving as a powerful symbol of the city's financial and industrial prowess. However, it was during the 1920s and 1930s that New York's skyline truly came into its own, thanks to the rise of the Art Deco movement. This style, characterized by its geometric shapes, sleek lines, and lavish materials, embodied the optimism and modernity of the Roaring Twenties. Art Deco skyscrapers weren't just tall, they were expressive, sculptural, and richly symbolic. Their setbacks, spires, and intricate detailing created dramatic silhouettes and gave the skyline its unique rhythm and texture. The Chrysler Building, completed in 1930, remains one of the most celebrated examples of Art Deco architecture, not only in New York, but in the entire world. Designed by William Van Allen, the Chrysler Building pushed architectural boundaries, both structurally and aesthetically. Its shining steel crown, adorned with radiating sunbursts and triangular windows, caught the sunlight in dazzling ways and established a new standard of elegance in urban architecture. It briefly held the title of the world's tallest building, a feat that was as much about ambition and pride as it was about architecture. But the competition was far from over. Just a year later, the Empire State Building surpassed the Chrysler Building, reaching an astonishing height of 1,250 feet. Designed by Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon, the Empire State Building was completed in record time during the depths of the Great Depression, standing as a beacon of resilience and American determination. Though simpler in design than the Chrysler Building, it possessed a monumental quality that commanded respect. With its tapered tower and glowing antenna, it became an enduring symbol of New York itself, towering, unshakable, and full of promise. These architectural feats were not just engineering accomplishments, they were deeply cultural statements. New York in the early 20th century was a city of dreams, where immigrants, artists, bankers, and industrialists all converged in pursuit of opportunity. The skyscraper came to embody this dream. Rising out of dense neighborhoods and bustling streets, each new building was a monument to ambition and innovation. Architects, developers, and city planners worked together to shape a vertical city that reflected the spirit of progress. Even the zoning laws passed in 1916, which required tall buildings to incorporate setbacks and limit shadow coverage, played a key role in shaping the city's unique architectural silhouette. These setbacks led to the tiered, wedding cake forms that defined the Art Deco skyscrapers, combining legal constraints with artistic creativity. As a result, buildings not only complied with regulations, but also stood out as works of sculptural elegance, layered and luminous against the sky. By the mid-20th century, New York's skyline had become synonymous with modern urban identity. The skyscraper had transitioned from a novel experiment into a defining element of the city's character. Through the rise of the skyscraper and the influence of the Art Deco movement, New York established itself as a global leader in architectural innovation. These towering monuments told stories not just of steel and stone, but of hope, resilience, and the city that never stops reaching for the sky. As the Second World War came to an end, New York City stood on the threshold of another major architectural transformation. The devastation in Europe and parts of Asia left the United States as a dominant world power, and New York, in particular, emerged as a cultural and financial capital. The city's architecture began to reflect this new global role. The extravagance and ornamental flair of the Art Deco era gave way to a sleek, stripped-down aesthetic known as Modernism and architectural movement, grounded in simplicity, efficiency, and functionality. This was the age of the international style, and it would redefine the look and feel of New York's built environment. Modernist architecture rejected decorative excess. It was a language of clean lines, glass walls, and open spaces. Fueled by advancements in technology and materials, post-war architects focused on rational forms and unadorned surfaces. Steel, reinforced concrete, and expansive panes of glass became the new norm. The belief was that architecture should serve the needs of society, that form should follow function, and that buildings should reflect the modern era rather than mimic the past. Nowhere was this shift more visible than in Midtown Manhattan. One of the most iconic examples of the international style in New York is the United Nations headquarters, completed in the early 1950s. Designed by a team of architects from around the world, including Le Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer, the UN complex became a symbol not only of global cooperation, but also of architectural modernity. Its clean glass, curtain walls, rectangular forms, and minimal detailing represented a new international language of des known that was free of nationalistic styles or historical references. The UN building stood as a physical embodiment of post-war ideals, peace, unity, and progress through modern thinking. Around the same time, the corporate world was also embracing this new style. Skyscrapers were no longer about flamboyance or artistic expression. They were now efficient, uniform, and aimed at maximizing space. The Lever House, completed in 1952 on Park Avenue and designed by Gordon Bunshaft of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, set a new standard for commercial architecture in New York. With its sleek glass facade and elevated structure supported by pilotis, it created a sense of openness and lightness that was unheard of in older office buildings. It broke from the traditional wedding cake setbacks and presented a simple box, a pure expression of form and function. Soon after, the Seagram Building, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe in collaboration with Philip Johnson, took that minimalist ethos to an even higher level. Completed in 1958, this building became one of the most influential modernist skyscrapers in the world. Its elegant bronze and glass exterior, perfectly proportioned grid, and open plaza at street level reflected Mies' philosophy of less is more. The Seagram Building introduced ideas that would become standard in commercial architecture globally: the sleek corporate tower, the landscaped plaza, and the use of luxurious yet subtle materials to communicate dignity and restraint. Modernism was not just about skyscrapers. It influenced housing, cultural institutions, and public infrastructure. Lincoln Center, constructed in the 1960s, was an ambitious cultural complex that showcased modernist principles in its open courtyards, bold geometric forms, and use of modern materials. It brought opera, ballet, and symphony under one architectural vision, placing art at the heart of a modern urban space. But this era of modernism was not without its critics. Some New Yorkers found the new buildings cold, impersonal, and disconnected from the life of the city streets. The rigid grids and mirrored surfaces often ignored the human scale, creating windswept plazas and sterile interiors. Neighborhoods lost character when old brownstones and tenements were razed to make way for towering slabs of concrete and glass. Jane Jacobs, an urban activist, famously argued against the destruction of community in favor of planning ideology, and her voice gained traction as citizens began to question the human cost of modernization. Still, the impact of post-war modernism was undeniable. It gave New York a new architectural vocabulary that resonated with its role as a global hub. These buildings embodied the confidence and clarity of a city leading the world in business, diplomacy, and culture. They made space for new ways of working, gathering, and living. They became symbols of a time when the future seemed orderly, efficient, and within reach. As modernist towers reshaped the skyline, they left behind a legacy that continues to influence design today. Their clean lines and open plans laid the groundwork for later movements in minimalism and high-tech architecture. Even as the city moved toward more expressive and varied styles in the late 20th century, the lessons of modernism remained etched into New York's architectural DNA, quiet, powerful testimony to an age defined by clarity, structure, and international vision. In the 21st century, New York City's architecture has entered yet another transformative era marked by innovation, sustainability, and the integration of technology into the built environment. With the city's historical layers of Gothic cathedrals, Art Deco skyscrapers, and modernist towers serving as a rich backdrop, contemporary architects now face the challenge of designing for a fast-paced, high-density metropolis while responding to urgent global concerns like climate change, population growth, and resource scarcity. The result is a vibrant, forward-looking architectural landscape that seeks to harmonize aesthetics, function, and environmental responsibility. In recent decades, New York has seen a rise in bold, experimental structures that break away from traditional forms and explore new materials, geometries, and building systems. Unlike the rigid lines of modernism, many contemporary buildings emphasize fluidity, asymmetry, and organic inspiration. The skyline has evolved to include curved glass towers, dynamic facades, and sculptural silhouettes that redefine the visual identity of the city. For instance, buildings like the Via 57 West, designed by Danish architect Bjarke Ingels, challenge conventional high-rise design with its tetrahedron shape that maximizes natural light while preserving views of the Hudson River. This building exemplifies a growing trend of combining daring architectural concepts with practical, environmentally conscious solutions. Sustainability is now at the core of architectural discourse in New York. In a city that grapples with issues such as air pollution, energy consumption, and rising sea levels, green architecture has become more than a trend, it is a necessity. Building codes and policies increasingly prioritize energy efficiency, renewable energy use, and sustainable construction practices. One notable example is the Bank of America Tower at One Bryant Park, which was one of the first skyscrapers in the United States to achieve LEED Platinum certification, incorporating advanced air filtration systems, rainwater harvesting, and energy-efficient lighting. The tower sets a benchmark for sustainable high-rise design. Public spaces have also been reimagined through the lens of environmental stewardship and community engagement. The High Line, a former elevated railway-turned linear park, has become an international model for adaptive reuse and urban regeneration. Stretching along Manhattan's west side, it weaves together landscape architecture, public art, and urban design in a way that reconnects people with nature amid the steel and concrete of the city. The project has not only enhanced biodiversity in a dense urban area, but also spurred the revitalization of surrounding neighborhoods, illustrating how sustainable design can have far-reaching social and economic impact. Technological innovation plays a critical role in contemporary New York architecture. From parametric design tools that allow for intricate, efficient forms to smart building systems that optimize energy usage in real time, architects and engineers are pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Digital modeling and 3D printing have opened up new possibilities for prefabricated components and precision construction, reducing waste and improving quality. Buildings are becoming more interactive and responsive, using sensors and automation to adjust heating, cooling, and lighting based on occupancy and weather conditions. This integration of technology reflects a growing recognition that buildings are no longer static structures, but dynamic environments that can adapt to human needs and ecological demands. Moreover, the focus on inclusivity and social responsibility is reshaping how spaces are designed and experienced. Architects today consider the diverse needs of urban dwellers, striving to create buildings and environments that are accessible, equitable, and supportive of well-being. Affordable housing developments, for example, are increasingly incorporating sustainable features once reserved for luxury projects such as green roofs, solar panels, and community gardens. Initiatives like passive house construction, which drastically reduces energy use through airtight design and insulation, are being applied to low-income housing across the city, demonstrating that sustainability and social equity can go hand in hand. New York's architectural future is also being shaped by a renewed commitment to resilience in the face of climate change. After the devastation of Hurricane Sandy in 2012, city planners and architects began rethinking waterfront development and infrastructure. Projects such as the Big UA protective system of parks, berms, and floodwalls encircling Lower Manhattan aim to shield the city from future storm surges while providing recreational and green space for residents. Such efforts underscore a shift from reactive design to proactive, preventative urban planning. Ultimately, contemporary architecture in New York is defined by its ability to evolve while maintaining a deep respect for the city's heritage. Architects now work within a dense, historically rich urban fabric, often finding creative ways to blend old and new. Landmark restorations, adaptive reuse of industrial buildings, and the integration of heritage facades into new developments all speak to a nuanced approach that values continuity alongside change. In this way, the architecture of modern New York becomes a dialogue between past and future, tradition and innovation, a living testament to the city's enduring spirit and capacity for reinvention. The architectural journey of New York City is a remarkable reflection of its evolution as a cultural, economic, and social powerhouse. From its humble colonial origins, where Dutch and British influences laid the foundational aesthetic of early settlements, to the rapid urban expansion of the 19th century, the city's built environment has always mirrored its historical context. The rise of the skyscraper in the early 20th century redefined the skyline and became symbolic of American ambition and innovation, with towering structures like the Empire State Building and Chrysler Building capturing the spirit of the age. As the city entered the mid-20th century, modernist principles ushered in a new era of minimalism and functionalism, embodied in projects like the United Nations headquarters and the Seagram Building. These architectural milestones not only emphasized form following function, but also demonstrated New York's openness to global ideas and design philosophies. In the postmodern period, a wave of reinterpretation emerged, combining historical references with playful, eclectic forms that challenged the rigidity of modernism. Iconic designs such as the Sony Building brought character and complexity back to the skyline, marking a new creative chapter. Today, New York stands at the forefront of contemporary architectural innovation, embracing sustainability, resilience, and digital technology to address the pressing needs of the 21st century. With eco-conscious skyscrapers, smart buildings, and inclusive public spaces, the city continues to adapt and reinvent itself without losing sight of its historical roots. The blend of old and new, be it a restored brownstone beside a shimmering glass tower, tells a story of continuity and progress. Altogether, the architectural history of New York is not just a chronicle of styles and structures, but a dynamic narrative of identity, resilience, and visionary transformation that continues to inspire cities around the world.